Welcome back to Contracts and Coffee. I'm Stephen Long, real estate broker and instructor here, continuing our conversation in this series on the North Carolina Offer to Purchase Form 2T, Offer to Purchase and Contract. We are on page 5 of the Offer to Purchase, and we left off talking about the buyer's due diligence and things that they should investigate. That conversation perpetuates a little bit over onto page 5, including things like investigation of streets, whether they're private streets or public. Are they state maintained, or is there a road maintenance agreement for a private road that exists? These are things that they'll need to know during their due diligence period, specifically the roads, because if there is a private road and it is a loan involved, the lender is going to require a private road maintenance agreement that says, hey, we love your property, we're willing to use this property as collateral for this loan. However, we need to ensure that you will always have access to the property. So how is that getting done? Who's taking care of the road? So that private road maintenance agreement is typically a document that the neighbors have all signed to agree to take care of the road. If it's a gravel road, bringing in gravel, maintaining it, scraping it, whatever needs to be done. If there is not a private road maintenance agreement in place, you may be asked to go knock on some doors and find one. So that's something that may take some time and something we need to discover in our due diligence period. Also, access to utilities. A lot of people are working from home more, so they need high-speed internet. Do they have that there? Is that something that your folks can connect to? Do they have everything they need? And so those are also some other considerations to look into while you're conducting your due diligence as a buyer. One thing that does sometimes come up is that while buyers are doing these inspections, they have a home inspector who comes out and they poke things with their knife and they look for, any kind of termite or wood damage or rot. They might go up in the attic. So there are things that during the course of these inspections, they may actually damage the property. And so the contract actually specifies that if you are doing your inspections, any damages that the buyer does, they would be responsible for repairing, unless it was in the course that when they were poking the wood with their knife and it goes clear through, and because it goes clear through is because it was rotten, that was already damaged. That's something the buyer or the inspector would be expected to repair because it was already damaged and broken. However, if they fell through the drywall as they're walking through the attic and they miss stepping on the board and their foot goes through the ceiling, the buyer and the inspector, whomever created that issue, would be expected to repair it back to its original condition. So keep that in mind as your folks are doing your inspections. Remember that the property is being sold in its current condition, meaning the seller is not obligated to do any repairs or fix anything. I think this is a common misunderstanding amongst buyers and sellers and brokers. We're doing our due diligence to determine as a buyer, do we want to move forward with the property, learn everything about it, and is it something we can live with? Now, at the end of that period, we have the option of doing the due diligence repair request agreement that says, hey, Mr. Seller, here's some of the things that we found in our investigation period. We would like you to fix items 1, 2, and 3. And the seller is by no means obligated to fix anything. So they have the option of saying, sure, I'll fix it all, or saying, no, I'm not fixing any of it. Or they may say, you know what, I'll fix items 2 and 4, you can fix the rest. Or sometimes they might give an additional money credit and say, I'll give you another $500 on seller paid closing costs on your behalf in lieu of repairs. And so that becomes another negotiation point. So always make everyone aware that really while we're negotiating the contract on the front end to get there, we tend to have a little bit of renegotiation that occurs during that due diligence process. So make sure your folks are aware of that. The buyer does have the right to terminate. Actually, both parties have the right to terminate this offer to purchase at any point in time. But the buyer's right to terminate during due diligence can be for any or no reason at all. They don't have to find anything in these inspections to say, oh, I don't like this. They could wake up on a Sunday morning and say, this was just a bad idea. Terminate the contract, receive a refund of earnest money, and move along, assuming they're in the due diligence period. Beyond 5 o'clock on the due diligence period, the buyer's earnest money becomes a question, and then it typically beyond 5 o'clock on that due diligence date, if they terminate beyond that period, the earnest money would become property of the seller, and the due diligence fee would also remain property of the seller as well. So, but they can terminate at any point, and that's an important conversation to have, as I think I mentioned in one of my previous videos where I had a buyer terminate the day of closing. That was certainly their prerogative. The earnest money was the only liquidated damages available to the seller in that capacity. So make sure you're getting adequate due diligence and earnest money fees to be prepared for those. So without any further ado, that takes us on page 5 to paragraph 5. And this deals with whether the buyer is getting a loan, and if so, what kind of loan are they getting. So are they getting an FHA, VA, conventional? Are we doing loan assumption? What does this look like? Now, a couple of little things to remember here is if you are going to do an FHA or VA loan, there is an FHA or VA addendum, and you will need to do that to the contract. It basically says if the house doesn't appraise at purchase price, I can't get a loan on it as a buyer. And so that addendum would need to be attached to the contract if your folks are doing an FHA or VA loan. We would just fill this in. This is to help everybody understand what type of loan product is going to be pursued by the buyer, and also it can be informative when a seller is making a decision. If I'm getting the buyer's making an offer and they're getting a 203K rehab loan, and it might take 60 days to close that. That's important information that I want to know before I accept the offer, versus I might be looking at another offer that is a conventional or a cash offer. So those types of things can make a difference in the negotiation of the offer. Now remember, I'll reiterate, there is no loan contingency in the offer to purchase. So just because the buyer cannot get a loan does not get them a refund of their earnest money. The house, that's why I said we want the appraisal, we want loan commitment, we want as much done during our due diligence period as we can. You really don't want to pass 5 o'clock on that due diligence date until you're pretty darn sure we're closing, because any termination beyond 5 o'clock on due diligence puts the buyer's earnest money at risk. So again, I just want to harp on that. It's in the box on page 5. Typically things in the square boxes or bold on the contract are important. So make sure you're aware of it and point it out to your clients. There is a section on 5B as in boy that says that the current buyer does or does not have to sell another property to purchase. And so you would check the appropriate box there. So sometimes we're working with a buyer that we have their house for sale, their house is going to close, and when it closes, they will then have the money to purchase a new house. Well, that's where we're going to indicate that information to the prospective seller that says, hey, I do have a house that I have to sell before I can buy, and if something happens to that house, then I won't be able to buy your house. There is a contingent sale addendum that you can investigate if that is the case. I prefer and encourage you to use this due diligence time for that. If you have a house to sell and it is under contract, great. Try to extend your due diligence period for your current purchase to beyond the closing date of your current home, so that you have enough time to verify that your house will close. And if it does not close within the due diligence period, the only thing you have lost as a buyer is your due diligence money on your purchase. So you want to, you can use that due diligence period in that capacity, but you do have to tell them, do you have to have that property to sell in order to purchase, or do you not? And that is under paragraph 5B as in boy, where you will indicate that. And with that being said, that carries us to the end of page 5 of the offer to purchase and contract. So stay tuned and get yourself some more coffee, as I will, and I'll see you back here for page 6.